a year ago, people were taking climate change much less seriously than they now are, which is great. I think what worries me is that there's not enough focus on solutions as there should be.
You know, as we keep hearing, we have 10, 12 years to really shift this system, this model of consumption, of development, or it's going to be too late.
And I think it's moved from the inconvenient truth to now the convenient solutions. We have to have convenient, easy to do solutions for people. Simple as that.
I created the Climate Force Challenge. It's a 7-year mission to reduce 360 million tons worth of CO2. To put that into perspective, that's close to 1 day's worth of annual emissions that get spat out from industry, the back of cars. And so in 7 years, I'm working towards reducing that 360 million tons. And to do that, I'm offering solutions that allow us to not only understand our impact, whether it's on an individual level or on a business scale, and have solutions that can draw down our impact, offset our impact, and also connect directly with the projects who are really making that drawdown a reality, whether it's reforestation, direct air capture, agricultural solutions, waste management, or social and educational programs.
As we well know, Asia is already dominating our planet as a world power. It will become the world power. And the difficulty is for Asia is that Asia still has to create wealth, it has to create jobs, it has to move through its own industrial revolution. The point is, it can't do it in the same way as the West did it. And if people in Asia don't realize that it may be really important to have a great economy, produce wealth, have jobs, but if you can't breathe and there's no water and there's no food, bit of a problem. I think Singapore can, as it has done, really lead Asia on some of these all-important issues. So that's why we're here, and we're proud to be here. It's important to inspire future leaders in Asia to take sustainability on as an issue, but most importantly, to see sustainability as a fabulous business opportunity. So you hit two things at once: look after our world and do the right thing for the economy and for finance.
Sustainable development model is economical, but it is also the right thing to do for the planet.
Here in New Orleans, we have spent the last few days interviewing a whole community of scientists working on climate change issues, and it was really beautiful to see that kind of cooperation. I think New Orleans is like a microcosm of effective multilateralism, and we really need a lot more of that to be addressing our climate issue. We had lots of scientists from all over the world, including India, China, Norway, France, Germany, Korea. They are really working here to study everything from pollution to atmospheric science to glaciology and cloud formation, and really everything really informs what climate change is all about. And the reality that really struck me here is that we both need to mitigate and to adapt, because whatever we do now to address climate change is already happening. And the one thing that really struck me as well is that there are some species that are winners and some species that are losers. There are actually some that thrive in the warmer conditions and some that don't thrive as well. But I think the key takeaway is really that we are really uncertain about what climate change is going to bring. We are in an era of unprecedented change when it comes to global ecosystems and biodiversity. So we don't actually know what climate change has in store for us. And that's quite scary. So what really is the answer to this complex issue? I think that among our interviewees, one thing really stood out for me, and that is that this is a very complex answer. But to really kind of address the issue, we really need change at scale. And to achieve change at scale, we need to look at businesses, we need to look at governments, we need to look at individuals to actually enact the right policies, adopt the right business practices, and make the right choices. And we need to rapidly decarbonize our systems, whether it's in agriculture or manufacturing or energy or transport, and we need to do it urgently. And so some of the solutions that have come up is that governments have to take the right decisions and make the right policies. Businesses really need to urgently decarbonize the way that they do business. And individuals, we need to be investing in greener, cleaner choices, whether it's energy, whether it's in the things that we buy, or whether it's in the politicians that we vote in, that we want to be voting in the people that think long-term for us. So beyond the physical solutions, I think the one thing that we have actually been thinking about actually is a more philosophical one. some of the people that we've met along the way actually think of climate change as an ethics issue. It's about how much society values growth, and do we have to redefine notions of economic growth, and also re-evaluating what it means to be happy in life, whether we need a lot of excessive material wealth. But underlying that is whether we can continue our current levels of consumption and production, and whether this is really within our planetary boundaries, because now it would seem that the answer is that we're not living within our planetary boundaries. And so the question is, how do we do so? I think one of the answers that is emerging is the fact that we need to rethink how we even manufacture goods or how we consume goods, and we need a circular economy. We need one in which we are managing our resources responsibly, and we can actually put all those resources back into the global economy and reuse them all the time, so that there is really no waste, and that we can really be considerate about the planetary boundaries in which they were living in. I think these are some of the questions and issues that were raised on our journey, and there are no easy answers, but it is really important that we consider them, because the climate change crisis is the defining crisis of the 21st century, and we need to keep talking about it. We need to find solutions, we need to find inspiration, and we need to find hope.
Science is to monitor and to understand the changes that we are witnessing, and these changes are tremendous, especially when you look in the Arctic as well as in the Antarctic, but mostly in the Arctic. We have seen changes that have never occurred for probably several million years, so this is quite tremendous. The temperature there has risen by 3.5 degrees on an annual average since the mid-90s. So this is way, way, way beyond any targets that we have set on the Paris Agreement. It's about 9 times as fast as on a global scale. It has completely changed the atmospheric phenomena. There have been heavy rainfalls in midwinter. We are talking about a place 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole. And having 100 millimeters of rain in the midwinter, this is so abnormal as anything can be in the weather in the Arctic. And this leads to, for example, to heavy icing. The whole landscape is put under ice when it's refreezing. But even this amount of precipitation, usually this is a desert, an Arctic desert, and then we get 100 liters of precipitation within few hours. It's happening so fast and so dramatically, no one would have imagined it would do so. For more than 30 years now, things developing as scientists have feared it would develop, without politicians and society in general doing something about it in practice. And the farther we come with the development, the more drastic the changes have to be. So now we are in a really emergency situation in order to avoid the worst. We will not avoid all the consequences, but now we really are in an emergency. What we need to do is to put upside down the whole economic system. We have to reduce the emissions drastically within the next 10 years. And that will affect heavily all energy production, consumption, ways of mobility, traveling, and we have to turn upside down our agricultural system, because agriculture probably is responsible for in the order of 30 to 40% of all emissions. And that is also, in my opinion, the only hope we have. If we turn this agricultural system upside down, we might be able to take a considerable part of our emissions back into the earth, into the soil, because it will not be sufficient only to reduce the emissions, because we are already at a level which is not sustainable and will have severe consequences. We also need to take something out of the atmosphere. And that is the only way to do this, as I see it, is reforestation and having an agriculture that removes carbon from the atmosphere, and not as it does now, that it puts a lot of CO2 and methane up into the atmosphere. The question is whether we are living in the planetary boundaries. No, definitely not. It's very difficult for people to realize, but almost 8 billion people cannot ever increase their consumption. It's mostly us in the Western world, but also in evolving economies. This globe has limited resources, and it's documented that we are now at a level that the resources we could use sustainably, they are used up usually in April. And the rest of the year we are using the substance, the savings, so to speak. And the savings are becoming less and less, and we see it with deterioration in natural systems and so on. No, we are not at all at a level that is sustainable, and we have to reduce this footprint that we are putting on the Earth. Well, what should happen in Asia, as you are in the middle between the Arctic and the Antarctic, and you think you're as far away as you can come from these regions? Well, I think many people realize, not only scientists, realize now that you are not so remote from it. And we have a term which that's called teleconnections. And that means the connections between very remote areas in the atmosphere. So what's happening in the Arctic will affect, in the end, the climate all over the globe. Also in equatorial regions and tropical regions. I think the Chinese have already understood it, and also India has understood it, and that's why they are present in Svalbard. They have their research stations there, because they know that these abnormalities we have in the Arctic, they are affecting their climate systems, their weather patterns, and a lot of the abnormal events that have been in recent years, for example in China, can be directly linked to what's going on in the Arctic. The role of the science, well, it has been for many years to inform the public about what is going on. We might conclude that we have been not very successful in doing our job, but it's of course also an issue of having an auditorium that is listening and is willing to take a very uncomfortable finding. We can just continue to do our job and to say what we have found. We can ally with people who are willing to change, and for example now this very strong alliance between Fridays for Future movement and the Union of Concerned Scientists, that was really a hopeful sign for me. Things are changing. It's not just that we publish and write in books and journals about our findings and no one is bothering about it, but now we can ally with people who really want to do something about it, and that movement is getting and is gaining strength. I hope we make it in time. Well, solutions in developing countries, yes, I think the potential is huge there, because most people in developing countries are living in areas where there's a lot of sunlight and where lots of natural resources. And if there is one thing what these nations and people should do is to avoid the mistakes that we have made here in the developed world. And if I see most of Africa, Southern Asia, there is so much solar energy that could be used in a very sustainable way. And that is something that the Western countries, or at least some of them, have demonstrated. It's possible, even under less favorable conditions, to gain most of the energy from sustainable solutions. And if this would be applied on large scale in Africa or in Southern Asia, the energy issue would be solved. The other thing is that also many of these countries still have traditional agriculture, which is much more sustainable than our modern agrochemical business. And developing this into a large-scale sustainable agriculture would help tremendously. At the same time, saving what is left of the huge forests in tropical regions and combining a sustainable agriculture with the sustainable forestry, that would help tremendously, not only their own countries in terms of air quality, but also to solve the climate issue. Imagine you are driving down a steep hill and the road takes a bend at the bottom of the hill. And halfway down you notice your brakes are not working. So what do? Just go on? Or would you perhaps drive off the road in order to stop it before you're at full speed? And then there's someone sitting in your car and telling you, oh, you might get some scratches on the surface. Well, if that is more important than saving your life, and you maybe have a probability of 3% or so to survive when you crash down at the bottom of the hill, I think it's not worth taking care of that car and the scratches. And on the other hand, there is no other way but to continue. And I often quote Martin Luther, and if I knew that the world would end tomorrow, I would plant an apple tree today.
My name is Winston Chow. I'm an Associate Professor of Humanities here at the Singapore Management University. I work with the School of Social Sciences and also with the Office of Core Curriculum. I do lots of research on urban-related climate change. I look at how cities affect weather and climate and how weather and climate affects cities. Despite being half the world away, literally, Singapore and the Arctic there's an indirect link that is brought about by climate change. We know that during the summer in the Arctic, the sea ice melts and it's been melting at a rapid rate. So both the areal extent of sea ice and the volume of sea ice in the Arctic has gone down precipitously over the past 30 years. Why is that of concern in Singapore? Because once the sea ice melts significantly enough, you can then countries that usually use the route that passes through Singapore, through the Straits of Malacca, taking advantage of Singapore's geographical position as a trade node for various goods and services. Certain countries in Europe, certain countries in East Asia or in North America might find it more efficient, might find it cheaper to ship all these goods through the Northwest Passage, where it is unencumbered by the obstacles of icebergs or by other forms of sea ice. So if that happens, and it most likely will at some point in the future where sea ice is thin enough or is small enough in extent to make that trade route profitable, there will be that impact on Singapore's economy, on Singapore's prosperity that we have to consider, and this is no thanks to climate change. So the question is, what does the science say in terms of the impacts to Southeast Asia and to Singapore in particular? There can be direct impacts. Three come readily to mind. One would be the increased temperatures, the increased average temperatures that the entire region is facing. We see that also manifest in heat waves that are more frequent and can be more intense in the region. There's also an issue of changing levels of rainfall or precipitation. It can also be snow. So changing levels of rainfall. It can either be too much rainfall, which leads to extremes in floods that have been happening a lot in Southeast Asia. Climate change impacts are already visible today. It is not something that we'll see in the future. In Asia especially, it is manifest directly through increased temperatures outdoors, especially in summer, can exceed 45 degrees Celsius, like in Ahmedabad in India, which makes it almost fatal to work outdoors. The scientific community have been communicating this urgency, this issue of the sort of dangers of climate change, the hazards involved in climate change, since the first assessment report came out in the early 1990s. We've been very consistent in saying that it's human caused. There's much more evidence showing the dangers that arise from it. There's also much more literature showing how we can mitigate and adapt to it. Rapid, unprecedented changes and transitions in all aspects of society are required in order to keep to that 1.5 degrees C threshold. We can't force people as a scientific community. We have to remain objective. But in communicating that, the message has to be heard and has to be listened by people. It takes two hands to clap. We are trying to say that this is an urgent issue. We need policymakers, we need other stakeholders, businesses, the youths of today, the people who have a stake in what will happen in the years to come to join us. And it's frustrating. We can't resist the need for action on climate change. It is to our best interest, it's to your own interest to incorporate sustainability thinking, to incorporate that renewable energy is the way to the future, that fossil fuels are on the way out. It's a sunset industry. Companies can divest from this sort of pollutive industries into renewable energies that are the future, that can give you a profit, that can actually be aligned with the sustainable development goals that the United Nations has generated with the SDGs. I remain optimistic, and we all should remain optimistic. It's easy to sink into despair that there's nothing that can be done. The impacts will overwhelm us, but look at the past. There are historical precedents that can be followed, that can show the way towards aligning everybody's interests towards mitigating climate change. And I remain optimistic that such a path can be followed as well, rapidly, in the years to come to deal with climate change.
My name is Ching Sheng. I am a lecturer from LaSalle College of the Arts, and I'm actually a filmmaker and animator, and I'm also known for being an artist, as I do painting as well. I was selected to be one of the winners, and the competition is basically called CDL E-Generation Challenge, and I managed to win a trip to the Arctic. It was a 2-week expedition in the high Arctic, Svalbard and Norway. So we went there in June 2019 and then got on an expedition ship. It was called the National Geographic Explorer. Actually, it was not supposed to be this warm in the Arctic 20 to 30 years ago. It was 4 to 5 degrees colder. You could still have sub-zero degrees in the Arctic during summer, and there was still plenty of sea ice. And actually the sea ice disappeared so much that on the last 2 days, we were actually able to sail all the way to almost 80 degrees north. That is quite far for a June period of time. For the sea ice to actually melt so fast that we were able to go all the way up north. And of course there we saw where the sea ice was for the first time. It was magnificent. At that point, I had that moment where I don't really want this to disappear completely. It should still be there even in summer. It is what keeps our Earth cool enough. So I had plenty of such moments in the Arctic, and it really felt strong to me. I think the highlight of this trip was to actually see whales, and we saw a bowhead whale. It was one of the rarest animals to see, and then for us humans to just, over a few hundred years, progress so much that we are actually putting them in danger. I feel that there's, of course, something that we need to do in reverse to undo what we have done wrong and to do what is right. It's actually very sad to see all these icebergs just disappearing. For us living here, it's not that we shouldn't care because it doesn't affect us. It will in the end affect us. I believe the whole ecosystem is called an ecosystem because it's all interconnected. So from my Arctic experience, I would like to really also engage youth in particular, because after all, this is the competition that I took part in is a youth challenge. So it's for youth. It's for us to actually tell the stories to youths who will live long enough to actually experience the effects, the dangerous effects of climate change, and of course their children as well. For me, art as a whole is a powerful storytelling medium. So I would like to use art and animation to actually engage them with stories to share how this climate change will actually affect them. Young people actually has a lot more voice nowadays. The government do listen to what the young people are saying. There are so many initiatives around young people nowadays, and I feel like even when they're in school, they could actually start something. They could start initiatives, they could start societies and clubs, they could participate in dialogue. Okay, there are actually quite a lot of avenues that I saw young people in, workshops, talks, even a recent Youth for Climate festival organized by City Development Limited. These are different channels that young people can actually contribute. We are still kind of living the life that we think is convenient and it is not sustainable. Then I think it's a problem, it's going to be a problem in the next few decades. We need to double the speed of how we actually protect our planet. So I think definitely government should do things much faster, should kind of catalyze the whole dialogue with communities, really take in the kind of opinions from different people and to make a really good decision from there. And the best decision is always something that keeps us sustainable, keeps us going, keeps the next generation going, and it's always about nature, human relationship that we should preserve.
My name is Wen-Sing Hui and I studied Geography and Political Science. And while studying, I also interned at the Jane Goodall Institute and the Institute of Water Policy under the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. So because the environment is such a multifaceted field, I thought any judicious or comprehensive solution will require my experience in a range of fields, and that's why I got myself involved in basically everything from biodiversity conservation to hosting climate summits and so on. When I was in the Arctic, what really stood out to me was definitely wildlife because it's my first love. And so I witnessed firsthand that the Arctic is a region teeming with life, which actually reaffirmed my commitment to protecting life up there in the north. And so I really feel a much stronger urge to do something about global emissions so as to prevent the drastic ice melt that's happening up there. One of the key takeaways from the Arctic was definitely meeting the National Geographic naturalists and ship operators who have been operating in the polar regions for some over 30 years. Because these are the people who can confidently compare what it's like now versus decades ago. And when they attest to the ice melting insanely faster than before, or the species ranges being affected, their survival changing, it really scares me because these are the people with a long-term perspective. And at the same time, it shows how gradual the change is, that sometimes maybe human arrogance can prevent us from taking urgent action, even though the change when you compare the 2 points is so dramatic. So maybe we'll do better to listen to such experts like the scientific community because they have a much more informed view of how serious the crisis is and can provide the most judicious recommendations of what kind of action we need. I want to make an activity book for primary school kids, teaching them about local biodiversity. Because I've talked to a lot of local conservationists, and we can all agree that if you don't feel connected to something, you won't feel an urge to protect it. And eco-literacy in Singapore is something that can be improved on. And more importantly, I want to inculcate values of respect for nature or responsibility for the environment, because ultimately I believe that what drives behavioral change isn't information, it's values. So for instance, I do everything I do because I value justice and compassion. And it's not because of the facts I know or the reports I've read. And so more broadly, I hope that public education takes a step in this direction, whether it's in schools or in public campaigns. I hope that we also focus on imbibing the right values, the eco-friendly values, instead of just presenting information to the public. So the youth in Singapore are actually doing a lot, but like with many ground-up initiatives, it's kind of like a tapestry. So I'm assuming that with greater coordination, maybe we'll be able to amplify and concentrate our collective voice, and perhaps with more resources available that we can tap onto, like funding or free venues for our events, we'll be able to do a lot more. And it's also an area where governments and the private sector can contribute to and collaborate with us.
We are actually in a city that might be the first city which has politically decided to become the plastic-free city in the Arctic. So it's a place where we're taking a lead on stopping plastic pollution from where we are. Not because there's so much plastic pollution happening from the Arctic, but coming with the currents from other places of the world, it's something that is also affecting the Arctic. And I would also like to mention that one of the main plastic polluters And perhaps most damaging to the ecosystems is ghost fishing nets that has been cut off or lost at sea and remains in the ocean and becomes microplastic or keep fishing. So that's something that we have a strong focus on in the Arctic in the years to come.